Welcome everyone, you dedicated UPSC aspirants out there to the deep dive. Your one-stop shop for, all the daily current affairs that really matter for your exam prep. Today is, April 1st already, 2025. Can you believe it? And this is part one of our deep dive. Just a heads up, some of what we discussed today might sound familiar from past deep dives, but hey, consider this a bonus revision session, right?
Absolutely. Today, we're diving into, well, a lot, actually, but it's all crucial stuff for your UPSC journey. We'll be covering the Bodh Gaya Temple and all the debate around it. Also, India's brand new green credit program. Oh, and then there's the earthquake near Tonga. We'll cover some key facts about Tonga as well. Don't forget the Sarhul festival, lots of socio-political angles there. Plus, we've got updates on the Parbati-II Hydroelectric Project. And guess what? The Indian Air Force is participating in a multinational exercise. We'll dig into that. Then there's the Red Cross's aid appeal for Myanmar. And of course, we can't ignore the environmental impact of deep-sea mining. Some fascinating discoveries in the Karimpuzha Wildlife Sanctuary. And last but not least, we'll break down the role of centrifuges in uranium enrichment. A lot on our plate today.
You said it, a truly diverse set of developments. Okay, so let's kick things off with something, well, quite historically significant and a bit controversial too. The Bodh Gaya Temple. I'm sure you've seen headlines about protests by Buddhist monks, specifically under the All India Buddhist Forum, AIBF for short. They're demanding the repeal of the Bodh Gaya Temple Act of 1949. For those who need a refresher, what exactly does this act say, and why is it causing such a stir right now?
Well, you see, the interesting thing here, especially for your prep, is that the act tried to achieve this delicate balance. Back in 1949, it set up an 8-member management committee for the temple. Now, the rule was equal representation for Hindus and Buddhists. Seems fair, right? But there's a catch. The chairperson, always the district magistrate, the DM.
Right.
And historically, this position's been mostly held by, well, Hindus. So it kind of highlights a challenge India's been facing since independence, balancing out historical grievances with, fair governance and staying true to the whole secular state idea.
So you can see how this could create a perception of a Hindu majority running things, despite the whole equal representation thing on the committee itself. It's not just a recent development either, is it?
No, not at all. Buddhist groups have wanted full control of what they see as the Bodh Gaya Mahavihara for a long time. To truly grasp the situation, let's step back in time a bit. Emperor Ashoka, way back in the 3rd century BCE, he built the original temple, flourishing Buddhist center for ages. But then came the 13th century. Bhakti Archaeology's invasion happened, and Buddhism in India took a hit. Fast forward to 1590, and a Hindu monk establishes the Bodh Gaya Mutt. And that's how Hindu control over the temple became the norm. Even British-era records mention it.
So to be clear, the 1949 Act was essentially the government stepping in post-independence to sort out these long-standing disputes, moving control away from, one single Hindu authority to a more inclusive committee.
Exactly, aimed at finding a solution. Then in 2013, they amended the act to address that whole DM religion issue, said the chairperson could be of any faith. And back in the early 90s, when Lalu Prasad Yadav was chief minister of Bihar, he drafted the Bodh Gaya Mahavihara bill, wanted to hand over the management completely to Buddhists. It even included a ban on Hindu practices within the temple, things like idol immersions and weddings. But that bill, it never saw the light of day.
Really illustrates the complexities involved in managing religious sites that have such, well, intertwined histories. Before we move on, can you remind us about the Mahabodhi Temple complex itself, its significance and all of that?
Of course. The Mahabodhi Temple complex. It's huge in Buddhism, one of their 4 holiest sites. It marks the spot in Bodh Gaya, Bihar, right by the Naranjana River, where Siddhartha Gautama, achieved enlightenment and became the Buddha. The other 3 big ones are Lumbini, where he was born, Sarnath, where he gave his first sermon, and Kushinagar, where he attained parinirvana. And here's a fun fact. It's also one of India's oldest brick structures still standing. Ashoka started it in the 3rd century BCE, though what we see now is mostly from the 5th or 6th century CE. Deservedly got the UNESCO World Heritage Site title back in 2002.
It's an incredible place. What are some of its main architectural features that our listeners should know?
The Grand Temple is a real showstopper, 50 meters high, with this pyramidal top called a shikara, all covered in intricate carvings, arches, the whole works. Then there are 4 smaller towers around it, each with its own little dome, like an umbrella. And of course, you can't forget the secret Bodhi tree. It's believed to be a descendant of the actual tree where Buddha got enlightened. The Vajrasana, or diamond throne, marks the exact spot he meditated on. And inside the shrine, there's this beautiful yellow sandstone statue of Buddha encased in glass. The whole complex is about 4.8 hectares and includes loads of old shrines and new structures built by devotees over the years.
A truly pivotal place in our history. Okay, let's move on from ancient heritage to a more recent initiative, India's Green Credit Program, or GCP as it's called. Sounds promising, but I hear there were some legal hiccups. Can you tell us more about that?
You're right. The Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the MOE FMCC, they went ahead and launched the GCP despite some concerns from the law ministry about whether it was actually legal. Basically, a green credit, or GC, is like a reward you get for doing something good for the environment. And these credits, you can trade them on a special exchange, similar to how carbon credits work. The tricky part is making sure it's all legit, preventing greenwashing and making sure the environmental benefits being traded are real.
So it's a market-driven approach to encourage a positive environmental impact. What's the legal foundation of this whole program?
It operates under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. The big picture goal is to boost forest cover, push sustainable practices, and basically reward anyone doing things that benefit the environment.
And who exactly can earn these green credits? It can't just be for the government, right? Who can get involved?
Not at all, no. It's meant to be inclusive. Individuals, communities, industries, anyone can earn GCs. They just need to be doing eco-friendly things, like planting trees, conserving water, adopting sustainable farming, all those good things.
So if a community starts a big tree planting project, they could earn these credits. How does the actual trading work then?
Exactly. They get tradable green credits, which acknowledge their efforts, and they can sell these credits on a dedicated platform. And who buys them? Well, think industries that need to offset their environmental impact, like companies that are required to plant trees to compensate for their projects. Instead of planting themselves, they can buy green credits from those who've already done the planting.
Sounds like a clever way to create a market for environmental responsibility. How's the program been doing since it launched? Has there been much interest?
There's definitely been some initial buzz. So far, 384 entities have signed up, including a good chunk of public sector undertakings, 41 to be exact. Some of the big names are Indian Oil, Power Grid, and TPC. Shows there's interest from both the public and potentially the private sector, too.
Earlier, you mentioned that it's similar to carbon credits. But for our listeners prepping for the UPSC, what are the main differences they should keep in mind?
Good point. While they both use market mechanisms for environmental good, there are key differences. Firstly, carbon credits fall under the Energy Conservation Act of 2001, not the Environment Protection Act. Also, carbon credits are mostly for big industries trying to cut emissions, while green credits are broader. Even individuals and communities can participate. The main aim of carbon credits is specifically to reduce greenhouse gases by putting limits on them. Green credits are more about encouraging a range of environment-friendly actions. And in terms of trading, carbon credits have both national and international markets. Green credits are currently just domestic. But here's an interesting thing. If you do something that earns you green credits, like planting trees, you might also be eligible for carbon credits because of its positive impact on climate change. But the other way around doesn't work. You can't convert your carbon credits into green credits.
Thanks for breaking that down. Now, let's shift gears geographically. We saw news about a strong earthquake near Tonga. For those not familiar, can you give us a quick rundown on this island nation?
Absolutely. Tonga, officially the Kingdom of Tonga, also known as the Friendly Islands, is a bunch of islands, 169 to be precise, but only 36 have people living on them. It's located in the South Pacific Ocean. To give you some bearings, it's south of Samoa, east of Fiji, and a bit north of the Tropic of Capricorn. Now, geographically, the Western Islands are volcanic. There are actually 4 active volcanoes there, and they tend to be higher up. The Eastern Islands, they're mostly coral and pretty low-lying. Out of the 3 biggest islands, Tongatapu, Hawaii, and Vavo, Tongatapu is the most populated, and that's where the capital, Nuku'alofa, is.
With its location, is an earthquake like this a rare occurrence for Tonga?
Unfortunately not. It sits smack dab in the Pacific Ring of Fire. So volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, sadly pretty common there. A little bit of history for you. Tonga used to be under British protection but became fully independent in 1970. Interestingly, never actually colonized in the true sense. It's a constitutional monarchy now, part of both the Commonwealth and the UN. They speak Tongan and English, and their currency is the Tongan palanga. Economically, well, they don't have much in the way of minerals or strategic resources, so they mainly rely on agriculture, fishing, and money sent back home by Tongans living abroad.
Thanks for that overview. Moving on to something a bit more cultural, let's talk about the Sarhul Festival. This is celebrated by Adivasi communities in India. Could you explain the core essence of this festival?
The Sarhul Festival. Oh, it's huge for Adivasis, especially in Jharkhand and the whole Chotanagpur area. It's their way of welcoming spring, and they see it as their new year. The word Sarhul itself literally means worship of the sal tree. Deeply symbolic, represents the union of the sun and the earth, which they believe is, the source of all life. Nature worship is at the heart of Sarhul, and the sal tree is super sacred to them, seen as the dwelling place of Sarnama, their village deity.
I'd love to learn more about the traditions. How do they usually celebrate this 3-day festival?
Each day has its own special thing going on. The first day is all about getting ready, cleaning houses, sprucing up the sacred groves called sarna stalls, gathering those beautiful sal flowers, and the village priest, the Pahan, he starts his fast. Then comes the main event on the second day at the sarna stalls. Lots of rituals, sacrifices, prayers for a good harvest and everyone's well-being. And of course, lots of music, dancing, all those vibrant cultural performances, showing off their heritage. The third day is all about feasting. Everyone gets together. Handia, their traditional rice beer, flows freely. They have this special ceremonial fishing thing. And all sorts of yummy Adivasi food is on offer.
Which tribes primarily take part in this Sarhul festival?
Oh, several. The Orayans, Mundas, Santals, Kadiyas, Hodis, they all celebrate it with a lot of enthusiasm. It's interesting, anthropologists like Sarat Chandra Roy, who studied it back in 1928, have noted how it's changed over time. It used to be more of a hunting ritual, reflecting their old lifestyle. Now it's mostly about agriculture, mirroring their current way of life. And thanks to migration, Sarhul is now celebrated even outside Jharkhand. You'll find it in Assam, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, even in countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan.
Beyond the cultural aspects, does Sarhul hold any political significance for these communities?
Oh, absolutely. It's become a powerful platform for Adivasis to assert their identity and rights. Back in the 60s, there was this influential leader, Baba Karthik Oran. He organized a Sarhul procession in Ranchi, and it was a big moment for raising awareness about tribal rights and protecting their culture. Since then, these processions have gotten bigger and more prominent, particularly the one at the Siramtoli Sarna Stall in Ranchi. It's become a focal point for them. Through Sarhul, they're basically saying, hey, we're here, we're distinct, and we matter. And there's a growing demand for official recognition of the Sarna religion in the census, which they see as crucial for acknowledging their unique faith. But of course, there's pushback. Some Hindu groups claim that Adivasis are part of Sanatan Dharma, which is essentially Hinduism, so they don't need separate recognition.
You mentioned sarna stalls earlier. Can you explain the significance of these sacred groves?
So, sacred groves, they're basically small forested areas that communities protect because they're religiously and culturally important. But they're also ecological gold mines. They're often home to all kinds of rare plants and animals. Think of them as little pockets of incredible biodiversity. Now, within these groves, you can't just do whatever you want. Hunting, cutting trees, and it's usually a big no-no. But some sustainable practices might be okay, like collecting honey or fallen branches.
Are these sacred groves only found in certain areas, or do they exist in different forms across India?
You'll find them all over India. They just have different names depending on the region. In Jharkhand and Bihar, it's Sarna, as we discussed. But in Himachal Pradesh, they call them Devvan. In Karnataka, it's Devarakodu. Down south in Kerala, it's Kavu, or Serpakavu. Maharashtra has Devrai or Daorai. Meghalaya, Law Kintang or Asonkosi. And in Rajasthan, they're called Uran. A really cool example of how communities are using this tradition for good is in Piplantri village, Rajasthan. They have this rule: every time a girl child is born, they plant 111 trees. It's brilliant. Not only has it helped the environment and boosted their income, but it's also helped reduce female feticide and empower the village women.
A great illustration of how culture and conservation can go hand in hand. Okay, let's talk about infrastructure now. There's been some news about progress on the Parbati-II Hydroelectric Project. Can you bring us up to speed?
All right, so the NHPC, the National Hydroelectric Power Corporation, they just announced a big milestone. They successfully did a trial run for Unit 2 of the Parbati-II project. That's a 200 milliW unit. And the project's in Himachal Pradesh, specifically in the Kulu district. For those taking notes, this is a run-of-the-river project, which means it uses the natural flow of the river without needing a huge dam to store water. It's situated in Sanj and harnesses the power of the lower Parbati River, which flows into the Bees.
Can you walk us through how the river water is actually used to generate power in this project?
Sure. So they built this concrete gravity dam at a place called Pulga in the Parbati Valley. This diverts the river's flow into a long tunnel, a head race tunnel, which is over 31 kilometers long. And this tunnel carries the water all the way to the powerhouse, which is in a village called Swend in the Sange Valley. That's where the magic happens and the energy is generated.
What's the total power this project can generate, and how much electricity is it expected to produce each year?
Well, the Parbati-II project has a total capacity of 800 milligair. That's divided into 4 units, each producing 200 millidale, like the one they just tested. Once everything's up and running, it's expected to churn out about 3,074 million units of electricity annually. The entire project is developed and owned by NHPC.
That's quite a significant addition to the power grid. When did this project start, and were there any major roadblocks or delays during its construction?
It actually started quite a while back in 2003, and they initially aimed to have it operational by 2010. But as with many large-scale projects, they ran into some serious challenges, leading to quite a bit of delay. They had problems with tunneling, water seepage into the tunnels, even flash floods and cloudbursts in the region made things difficult. On top of that, the geological conditions were pretty tough, making tunneling a real pain. But hey, the successful trial run of Unit 2 is definitely a positive step, showing progress despite the hurdles they've faced.
Shifting gears to international affairs, we heard about the Indian Air Force's involvement in a multinational air exercise hosted by Greece. Can you tell us more about Aniakos 25?
Aniakos 25 is a big deal in the world of air forces. It happens every 2 years, hosted by the Hellenic Air Force, Greece's Air Force. The main idea is to give different air forces a chance to, practice their skills in a setting that feels as close to real combat as possible. It's a great way to share tactical knowledge, learn from each other, and strengthen those military bonds between countries.
Where was this exercise held, and who are the key players alongside India?
This year, it was all happening at the Andravida Air Base over in Elis, Greece. They had a whole mix of aircraft and ground units from 15 countries taking part. The scenarios were designed to mimic all the complexities of modern air warfare.
And what did India contribute to the exercise? What kind of aircraft and personnel did we send?
The Indian Air Force brought their A-game. They sent their Su-30 MKI fighter jets. Those are multi-role aircraft, very capable. But it wasn't just about firepower. They also deployed essential support aircraft like the IL-78, which can refuel other planes midair, super important for long missions, and the C-17 Globemaster 30 for strategic airlift. That one's all about moving troops and equipment quickly wherever they're needed.
You mentioned 15 countries participating. Who else was there alongside India and Greece?
It was quite the international gathering. France was there with their Mirage 2000s. Israel brought their Gulfstream G550, which is an airborne early warning and control aircraft. Italy showed up with their Tornado Strike aircraft. Montenegro had their Bell 412 helicopters. Poland sent their F-16 fighters. Qatar had their F-15, some serious firepower there. Slovenia had a couple of PC-9 trainer aircraft. Spain brought their F-18 Hornets. The United Arab Emirates had their Mirage 2009s. And of course, the U.S. Air Force was there with their F-16s and their refueling tankers, the KC-46 Pegasus and the KC-135 Stratotanker. Quite a lineup, right?
Definitely sounds like a comprehensive and very diverse exercise. What are the key takeaways for the Indian Air Force from participating in something like INI Fuchos?
Participating in these multinational exercises gives the IAF, and any Air Force really, a huge advantage. They get to practice planning and executing complex air operations in a realistic and challenging environment, which is invaluable. It helps them fine-tune their tactics, techniques, and procedures, especially for those tricky air warfare scenarios. Plus, they get to see firsthand how other top air forces do things, what technologies they use, and that helps improve coordination and understanding between countries, which is essential for allies.
Let's shift focus back to humanitarian issues now. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies just launched an urgent appeal for aid after the devastating earthquake in Myanmar. Can you tell us more about the IFRC, its role, and all that?
The IFRC is, well, it's a giant in the humanitarian world. It's the biggest humanitarian network globally, actually. Founded way back in 1919, headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. And it's made up of a whopping 192 different national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. They have a massive volunteer force, something like 100 million people.
What are their main goals, and what kind of work do they do?
Their mission is simple but huge: to make life better for the most vulnerable people on our planet. That means stepping in during emergencies, natural disasters, man-made disasters, helping those who've been displaced, tackling health crises, you name it. They're there. They also work to build resilience in communities, helping them prepare for future disasters. They do a lot to boost the capacity of their member societies in areas like disaster response, health, social care, and community services. And on the global stage, they're the voice of those national societies, advocating for humanitarian needs and principles.
Sounds like they cover a lot of ground. How are they funded and how do they relate to the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC?
They depend on voluntary contributions. Governments chip in, NGOs, companies, even everyday people donate. It's all voluntary. Now, it's easy to confuse the IFRC with the ICRC, but they have different roles. Both are part of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, but the ICRC is more focused on humanitarian law and helping victims of armed conflict and violence. The IFRC's mandate is broader disaster relief, health, community care, basically, anything that falls under the humanitarian umbrella, even natural disasters. It's also worth remembering that the whole Red Cross movement started with Henri Dunant, a Swiss humanitarian who witnessed the horrors of war firsthand. His experience led to the creation of these organizations.
Thanks for clearing that up. Now let's dive into an issue with potentially serious long-term consequences: deep sea mining. There's been a recent study highlighting some major concerns, right? What did it find?
You're talking about the study published in Nature, titled Long-Term Impact and Biological Recovery in a Deep Sea Mining Track. It's caused quite a stir, and for good reason. The research was done by the National Oceanography Center in Britain. They looked at an area of the Pacific seabed that was mined experimentally over 40 years ago. And guess what? It still hasn't recovered properly. They found long-lasting changes in the makeup of the sediment and a worrisome drop in the number of larger creatures that live down there. It basically throws into question the whole idea of deep-sea mining and whether it's even possible to do it without causing irreparable damage.
Sounds alarming. Can you remind us what deep-sea mining actually involves?
It's basically digging up valuable stuff from the ocean floor, way down deep. We're talking about things like polymetallic nodules. They look like potatoes and are full of nickel, cobalt, rare earth elements, very important for technology. Then there are seafloor, massive sulfides, which form around underwater volcanoes, loaded with metals like gold, silver, copper, zinc. And don't forget cobalt-rich crusts found on seamounts, underwater mountains basically, full of cobalt, platinum, manganese, all crucial for batteries, electronics, renewable energy tech. Basically stuff the world needs more and more of.
I can imagine that the technology for this kind of underwater mining is pretty advanced. How does it all work?
It's still in its early stages, but developing rapidly. There are giant vacuum cleaners for the seabed, super smart robots using AI to pick out those polymetallic nodules, and specially designed machines for mining near underwater mountains and volcanic vents. It's a bit of a gold rush, but underwater. Demand for these minerals is skyrocketing, and what we have on land is running out. So countries and companies are looking to the deep sea, which is both exciting and a little scary, to be honest.
And who's in charge of all this? Who makes the rules for deep-sea mining out in international waters?
That would be the International Seabed Authority, or ISA. It was set up under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea back in 1982, started working in 96, headquartered in Kingston, Jamaica. They're responsible for regulating everything related to mining in international waters. They grant licenses, make sure the environment's protected, and generally oversee how these deep-sea resources are used. They've been pretty busy lately, especially with that meeting where 36 countries discussed whether to open up the deep seabed for commercial mining.
Given that study's findings, there's bound to be a lot of debate about the environmental impact, right? What are the main points of contention?
You bet. Scientists and environmental groups are really worried. Deep-sea habitats are fragile. It takes them ages to recover from any damage, and we don't even fully understand them yet. So there's a huge risk of wiping out species, disrupting delicate food webs, and causing damage that could spread far beyond the mining sites themselves. That's why many are calling for a total halt to deep-sea mining, or at least much stricter rules. It was a hot topic at that ISA meeting. It's a classic dilemma. We need these resources, but can we get them without trashing the planet? Tough call. By the way, India's in the game too. They're developing their own deep-sea mining tech as part of their deep ocean mission and have a contract with the ISA to explore for polymetallic nodules in the central Indian Ocean.
It's definitely something to keep a close eye on. Okay, let's finish off with some good news from the biodiversity front. The Karimpuzha Wildlife Sanctuary in Kerala just had some exciting discoveries. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, this is great news. The Kerala Forest Department was doing a survey in Karimpuzha, and they found 63 new species. We're talking dragonflies, damselflies, butterflies, birds, all sorts. It just goes to show how rich and diverse that sanctuary is.
Where exactly is Karimpuzha, and why is it ecologically important?
It's in the Malappuram district of Kerala, nestled on the western slopes of the Nilgiri Hills. It's a decent size, about 228 square kilometers, and it's a key part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, a UNESCO Man and Biosphere Program site. What makes it even more special is that it connects with Mukurthi National Park in Tamil Nadu and Silent Valley National Park in Kerala, forming this crucial corridor for wildlife. The sanctuary gets its name from the Karimpuzha River, which flows through it and eventually joins the Chaliyar River.
And what makes it such a haven for biodiversity? Why so many different species?
It's all about the landscape. You have these steep hills and deep valleys, marshes, grasslands, those unique shola forests high up, and plenty of water sources. Plus, it sits right at the edge of Tamil Nadu and Kerala, so you have this amazing mix of habitats and species from both states.
Are there any communities living in or around the sanctuary?
Yes, there are the Cholanikans, a nomadic tribe. They're recognized as a particularly vulnerable tribal group by the government. Their lives are deeply connected to the forest. They have a wealth of knowledge about the plants and animals there.
Can you tell us a bit about the plants and animals found there?
Karimpuzha is the only place in Kerala where you can find all 7 types of forest found in the state. You've got everything from evergreen rainforests and moist deciduous forests to those high-altitude grasslands and shola forests. And the animals, oh, they're incredible. Lots of species that are unique to the Western Ghats, like the Nilgiri tar, those lion-tailed macaques with their cool hairstyles, slender lorises, tigers, gars. It's a real treasure trove.
Yeah.
These 63 new species they found just reinforces how important it is to protect places like Karimpuzha.
Absolutely. Protecting these biodiversity hotspots is crucial. Finally, let's talk about something we often hear in the news, especially related to global security: uranium enrichment, and specifically the role of centrifuges, particularly in the context of Iran's nuclear program. Can you explain what centrifuges are and why they're important?
Iran's uranium enrichment program has definitely raised eyebrows worldwide, especially with all the talk about them having thousands of these advanced centrifuges. To understand the fuss, you need to know a bit about uranium. Natural uranium, the kind you dig up, is mostly uranium-238. But there's a tiny bit of uranium-235 mixed in, less than 1%. And here's the thing. It's the U-235 that's fissile, which means it can sustain a nuclear chain reaction. That's what makes nuclear reactors and bombs work.
So enrichment is basically about increasing that small amount of U-235.
Exactly. To use uranium as fuel in a typical nuclear power plant, you need to bump up that U-235 to about 320%. But for weapons, you need much higher concentrations, closer to 90%. And that's where centrifuges come in. They're like high-tech spinning machines. They separate stuff based on how dense it is. They're used in labs, in medicine, and, well, in making nuclear fuel or even weapons-grade uranium.
How do they actually work in enriching uranium? Can you break down the process?
So first you have to turn the uranium into a gas called uranium hexafluoride. That's UF-Euro for short. Then you feed this gas into these centrifuges, which are spinning super fast, like 50,000 rotations per minute, sometimes even faster. That spinning creates this immense force, pushing the heavier U-238 outwards, while the lighter U-235 stays closer to the center. This creates a small amount of gas that's slightly richer in U-235. And then they take this enriched gas and feed it into another centrifuge, and then another, and so on in a kind of chain or cascade. Each step increases the concentration of U-235. They keep doing this until they reach the level of enrichment they need.
What are the main parts of these centrifuges? How do they spin so fast and separate isotopes with such precision?
The heart of it is the rotor. That's the spinning part that generates all that force. It's housed in a sealed chamber where the gas is. The material they use for the rotor is super important. It needs to be crazy strong, but also light to withstand those insane speeds. Carbon fiber is a popular choice, along with other advanced materials, and the technology is always improving. That's why those advanced centrifuges are such a big deal. They can enrich uranium much faster and more efficiently than older models. And that, of course, has implications for how quickly a country could potentially build a nuclear weapon. That was quite a whirlwind tour of current events, wasn't it? We covered a whole lot today, from ancient temples and environmental programs to international exercises and humanitarian crises, even delving into the depths of the ocean and the complexities of nuclear technology. All incredibly important for you UPSC aspirants out there.
Absolutely. And as you continue your UPSC prep, remember that these events are all interconnected. It's about understanding the bigger picture, the forces at play, the challenges we face as a nation and as a global community. Think about those tensions we talked about, like preserving our heritage while navigating modern governance, or balancing economic development with protecting the environment.
Critical thinking is key. Connecting the dots, analyzing different perspectives, forming your own informed opinions. Those are the skills that will set you apart in the UPSC exam.
We hope this deep dive has given you plenty to think about and helped you along your UPSC journey. If you found it useful, please do hit that like button and subscribe to the deep dive for more in-depth analyses. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of current affairs.